So tell me, how do you feel about Kamala Harris coming to town?
Exuberant, just elated that this community is going to have a first-hand contact with this incredible person who is, I'm going to cry. I'm so happy that a woman may be in charge, and a very capable woman with integrity.
Great little clip. You can see this is from August, a voter from rural Georgia, a woman almost emotionally overcome with the idea that Vice President Harris was going to visit their region, that Vice President Harris was a woman and cared about the issues they face. Rural America is energized right now in ways we haven't seen in a long time. And they're also in the target list, right? We've seen these attacks on Springfield, Ohio. We see these attacks on small town in Pennsylvania from the Trump and Vance movement. It is troubling. But the fact is, it's not real. It's not the real rural America. It's not what actually is happening in the places that we think we know, but we don't actually know them. And so I want to run a kind of a longish clip, if you will. This is Vice President nominee and Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, who's speaking actually before he got the nom. But it's such a great clip about what really life is like for rural Americans, what his background is, and why Republicans get it wrong. So let's see Governor Walz discuss this issue.
What I know is that people like J.D. Vance know nothing about small-town America. My town had 400 people in it, 24 kids in my graduating class, 12 were cousins, and he gets it all wrong. It's not about hate. It's not about collapsing in. The golden rule there is mind your own damn business. Their policies are what destroyed rural America. They've divided us. They're in our exam rooms. They're telling us what books to read. And I think what Kamala Harris knows is bringing people together around the shared values, strong public schools, strong labor unions that create the middle class, health care that's affordable and accessible. Those are the things. You look what they're talking about, they went right to division. They did not give us a plan on health care. Donald Trump talked about infrastructure. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris built bridges, built roads. So I think this is going back to the bread and butter, getting away from this division. We do not like what has happened where we can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner with our uncle because you end up in some weird fight that is unnecessary. and I think bringing back people together, well, it's true. These guys are just weird. And it's, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something. That's what they go at. That's not what people are interested in. And there is angst because robber barons like J.D. Vance and Donald Trump gutted the Midwest, told us we didn't do that. They talk about private schools. Where in the heck are you going to find a private school in a town of 400? Those are public schools. Those are great teachers that are out there making a difference and gave us an opportunity to succeed. That angst that J.D. Vance talks about in Hillbilly Elegy, none of my hillbilly cousins went to Yale, and none of them went on to be venture capitalists or whatever. It's not who people really are. So I think that message doesn't resonate. You saw it yesterday. The energy out here exploded. We all broke fundraising records, but that's not what I look at. Door knocks are full. Phone banks are full. People are talking about what's possible. We are finally on offense about an America where we're all together. So good. Have Orban down to Florida. The vice president will come out here and stand in a Planned Parenthood. She stands in a Planned Parenthood clinic in St. Paul. That's what people want to see.
It's clear that Vice President Harris made a conscious decision to pick Governor Walz because she cares about the rural vote. She cares about all of America, and she wanted a partner who could speak that language. And again, actions speak louder than words, right? And she spoke very loudly when she picked Tim Walz to be her running mate and run and encourage a rural coalition. The campaign just recently hired a rural coordinator for the campaign itself. They're taking this very seriously because if we've seen anything in the last 2 weeks, with the attacks on Springfield, Ohio, and others, that the actual, what we think is rural America in our heads, or even and this is Democrats and Republicans, is not the modern version. When you dig in, you find out that the Haitian immigrants, the legal Haitian immigrants that have been welcomed to Springfield, Ohio, were welcomed. They've empowered that town. They've added jobs. They've integrated the community because they need to be re-empowered. We've all driven across America and seen towns on the decline. We can't do it on our own. America is a country of immigrants. So I thought it's the perfect time to talk about the rural issues. And as always, I've always got the perfect guest. And so we're going to have him join us. Again, since you don't know who I am, I'm Fred Wellman. This is On Democracy with FP Wellman right here on the Midas Touch Network. Let's get on with the show. Welcome. As I mentioned 30 seconds ago, I am Fred Wellman, host of On Democracy with FP Wellman. in all your favorite places to find your podcast and your videos and all those kind of things. Man, what an exciting time to be hosting a show about democracy, right? And so many cool things happening right now as far as the Harris and campaign and everything going on. I just want to keep that momentum and that good feeling going. And one of the things we talk about a lot in the show, as you know, of course, is the rural vote, rural Americans. We got our friend Jess Piper's been on a number of times. We were just talking 2 weeks ago with John Della Volpe, talking about the youth vote. So I really wanted to get somebody I've been talking to forever, helping him out and get him on the show. Paolo Cremidis is the executive director of the Outrun Coalition, which is a grassroots-led organization, volunteer organization that helps rural county Democratic parties and progressive organizations. Now, what's really great is Outrun is currently a coalition partner in the Rural Americans for Harris campaign steering committee, which is helping to mobilize rural Americans across all 50 states, just announced it last week. So I'm excited to get Paolo in here to talk about this important message. Paolo, welcome to the show. Welcome to Midas Touch Network, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. It's honestly an honor. I know we've been going back and forth, and you've been a really big supporter of our work in helping flip local elections in Florida and upstate New York and a bunch of other places. So it's really great to bring that momentum to the Fredmentum, as we could call it. Right?
Wow, that's a really cool thing to say, man. Thank you. It's funny.
Yeah.
I had somebody text the other day, like they were saying, "Hey, can you tweet this?" I'm like, whatever. I'm like, no, you need to because we have a thing called the Fred bump. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's kind of cool. It's funny because I've been doing this for a while, but thank you. That's very sweet. It's very kind of you, and I appreciate it. Look, I opened the clip of rural voters in Georgia. There was a wonderful woman, almost in tears, just talking the idea of Vice President Harris visiting their community and how important it was to have a woman on the ticket for a woman in the rural America. There's a real energy out there, isn't there? I mean, you're seeing it, aren't you?
Yeah, and we're seeing it in so many different ways because, if you watch the Rural Americans for Harris call, we talked about how this isn't just about getting 5% or more voters to come out in swing states. That's true. That's something that we're working on, and it's something that I'm pouring my heart into in northern Pennsylvania, not a mile away from where I'm from in Elmira, New York right now. But this is not just about that. It's about building momentum going into 2025 to break supermajorities in red states like Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Florida, what have you, right? And also mobilizing what I call the volunteer base of the future, right? Yeah. So there are a lot of first-time folks who are going out to volunteer, knock on doors and stuff like that. The knocking on doors for Vice President Harris and Governor Walz takes away the fear of this idea that rural communities aren't a place that we can run in, right? Yeah. And that momentum is helping us mobilize people, young people, women, LGBTQ plus folks that have existed in these rural communities forever, immigrants like myself, right? Yeah. Let's say, you're going to go knock on doors this year. Next year, you're going to run for mayor to Towanda. Next year, you're going to run for mayor of Mansfield. Next year, you're going to run for village board in Elmira Heights. Next year, you're going to run for Justice of the Peace in Prentice County, Arkansas, right? This is, and then you're going to take that momentum and we're going to mobilize people. And, together we've run for something in other large national networks. We're going to say, okay, the Republicans told you can't win. You won. Be a thorn on the side of your local Republican congressman so that when they go to D.C. and start, legislating hate and all that crap, you have the largest mayor in that district being you have the largest town in that district being I actually think this is bullshit. Can I curse? I'm sorry. I apologize.
Oh, no. Yeah, this is the place for that.
Okay. Yeah, I actually think what Nick Langworthy or G.T. Glickman or, G.T. Thompson or whomever, these members of Congress, what they're doing is bullshit. And I'm from the same community and I got elected by the same people. And this is why we can't restrict women's rights. And when you do that, you mobilize people and you mobilize people in a way that's generational, because now you're not even talking about whether you're getting people to vote for Democrats at the top of the ticket. It's now, what can we do in 2024 to build a 50-state strategy in 2025 and going forward? Wow. Because a lot of the conversations around rural organizing and stuff, and I've seen this firsthand, right? When we founded Outrun, it was 5 Democratic elected officials and myself, and people were telling us, oh, we don't need diversity trainings. Now we're 523 Democratic elected officials across 17 states, right? Wow. And you see that momentum because people are just tired of being told that they can't belong in a community that exists in their existence, right? Yeah. What was the Harris-Walz, the Harris quote? You exist in the context of everything, whatever, right? Right. And so, we're taking that momentum and saying, it's not just a conversation about going into Wisconsin from Illinois, going into Pennsylvania from upstate New York, going into Georgia from Virginia and Tennessee. It's about why can't we have conversations around economic development and building economic opportunity for young people for the future in these county commissions in Eastern Tennessee? Why can't we have conversations around, building a future beyond coal in Southwest Virginia?
Yeah.
And honestly, like, making the argument that, like, if we're gonna let and I call them, like, there's a part of the Democratic Party that has a problem with this, right? If we're gonna let people define rural as white, if we're gonna let rich people do that, then we have a moral duty to run for office in our rural communities, because too long the Democratic Party has been told you can't do that.
I love that.
And when we do that, 75% of the time our candidates have won. I'm actually very proud of that. And people tell me that I'm touted enough, but
well, the second clip I ran was Tim Walz discussing what his upbringing was like in a small town in Nebraska with 24 kids in his high school class. 12 of them were cousins, and he went on an extended discussion in that clip I ran of how wrong Republicans and you admitted it's true, even amongst our fellow Democrats, get wrong about what is modern rural America and today's rural America. What do you see in your work? What do so many people get wrong about modern today's rural America?
I think that there's like this dynamic here, and I'm seeing it in seeing how Republicans are afraid whenever, and if you and look, this is a theory I have. I don't know, it's not science tested, but every single time a statewide Democratic candidate or a Democratic candidate mentions the word rural, it scares the ever-living shit out of the Republicans. Because this is what happens when we start talking about rural organizing in rural communities. When we talk to people like they're our neighbors, and it's not like they're Republicans or they're this like foreign entity or these like folks that are fueled by QAnon, and there are some of those.
Sure.
When we talk to people like they're people, when we talk to them like they're our uncles, our grandparents, our mothers, what have you, that changes the dynamic of the conversation. And guess what? No matter how much money Republican think tanks in places like the Upper East Side of Manhattan, like the Manhattan Institute, can throw at telling people in rural communities that Democrats are bad or what have you. Right. We've grown up in these communities. Like I was where I'm from in Elmira. I've been here since before MAGA was the thing. My family will be here. My dad will be here after MAGA. Yeah. Right. The conversations of these communities is like, it's not so much about like, what are the Republicans getting wrong? It's like, what are we doing to pick up the argument to fight against them? And I feel like, honestly, for the first time in my career, I've been doing rural organizing since I was 16. I'm 33 now. I don't have to lie and kind of like hide behind this idea that I'm some kind of like moderate that's like pro-life and I have to support assault weapons and like make sure that I am somehow, just hateful to people. I can be myself. And when you're yourself and you're like running for office in a rural community, that's what wins. Yeah.
I love it. And this diversity of our rural communities has come to the fore recently with these horrible, hateful things, the attacks on Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio. Now there's shifting to a town in Pennsylvania that's just 4,000 people, I think, total, to sort of target these towns for these immigrants. And what's shocking to me, and I think what's shocking Republicans, is that Republican officials from those communities, Republicans elected officials coming forward saying, stop, wait a minute, hold on, that's not true. Yeah. These immigrants into our community have turned things around. They're helping these new manufacturing plants that are ironically being built in rural places. These Amazon distribution centers are in rural places. That this diversity we're bringing in, these immigrants we're bringing in, we invited them. We want them to be part of the community, right? I mean, it's got to be hurtful. You're an immigrant yourself that's brought you. I mean, it's got to be hurtful. I mean, do you see a flip? Because in many ways, it's yet another. So I'm going to tell you a theory I have. I call it the MAGA law of physics. And the MAGA law of physics is for every action, there's an unequal and opposite overreaction by MAGA, right? So with the cat eating thing, all that stuff, it's backfired on them because they overreacted to it. And now they're being disproven by their own elected officials, right? So what do you? I mean, that's the fact of life, isn't it? That immigration diversity is actually helping us, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and it always has, right? Like, look, and immigration and diversity, it's not this like kind of like cookie cutter fairy tale story about in rural communities about like, I've never had to face racism. People haven't tried to make fun of me. Up until I was 18 years old, people call me Paul because they couldn't pronounce my name. Yeah. But in itself, like, you're able to teach people who you are and you're able to teach them to accept you. And if they accept you, like, people I went to high school with, like my friends Jeremy and John, still call me Paul. Why? As a term of endearment, right? And it's not an argument about like, do immigrants help these communities? It's like, we're here, we're going to be here, and our culture is as much a rural American culture as anyone. And it has been since like since 1890, whatever, right? And like a lot of the conversations around like rural diversity and rural organizing is, sure, there's a lot of hate being thrown at immigrants, but it's hate being thrown at immigrants by people who won't set a foot in our communities. Right. J.D. Vance and these guys that are making these arguments about rural communities and how they're supposed to function and how to act, they're more obsessed with proving the idea that they're right about how these communities function than actually making sure that we can thrive. Right. Because while they're talking about, immigrants eating cats, and I have a cat, I haven't eaten it. And I'm not trying to make fun of, but it's worth laughing at, but it's also worth recognizing this.
Yeah.
The arguments that Republicans are making about immigrants in rural communities are based on a trope that has been disproven by people like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right.
Something that Republicans had disproven a long time ago already, right? That if we're going to talk about immigrants and immigration and how people should run for office and how people are supposed to live in these communities, then if we attack them on the issue of them being foreigners or something, then we're going to win. That's not true.
Yeah.
It's backfired. And, most recently, in early August, we had the pleasure of working with a group of school board candidates in northern Florida and central Florida in the Panhandle, some of the most Republican parts of the state that have been ancestrally Democratic. Yeah. We ran 15 candidates for school board. 13 of them won against a Ron DeSantis or Ron DeSantis endorsed candidate in places that are 70 to 75% Republican, right? And we just told them, telling us on our way, and then helping people on, just be yourself. You've been in this community. You don't have to hide about anything. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. If we talk to people like they're our family and we bring them in and we make them feel included, then the hate goes away, but the hate is eradicated.
Right.
A lot of the conversation around, how do we confront neo-Nazis and stuff like that? Nothing scares a fascist more. And I know this personally because I dealt with some people like that. Nothing scares these people more than us having power and having a built-up collective power that's like, oh, it's not just Paolo Cremidis trying to get people to run for local office. It's Fred Wellman and Paolo and Jess Piper and all of these people saying like, it's not, like it's over. Like the conversation around diversity has been fought over. We've won. People think you're weird. We're going to run for office. You don't know how to run for office. And, just like J.D. Vance, you're really strange at talking to people and we're not.
Yeah.
And
that's it.
Yeah.
Right. And they hear it. They hear the weird. Yeah. They understand that they're not speaking their language. I think it's been one of the great things about this backfires. We've seen that over and over that people in those communities are saying, wait a minute, that's not us. You're not talking about us. Yeah. You're talking at us. And that's backfired. Let's take a brief break for our sponsors and we'll be right back. Yeah, it's fall. But for me, it's also election season. It is a stressful time. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going a million miles an hour right now. We're just a few weeks from the election. We're a few weeks from, into school. I mean, it is always a crazy time this time of year. And I have to watch after my stress and I have to watch after my health this time of year. So that's why heart healthy energy is so important to me, an important aspect of my life. Because if I don't stay healthy, if I don't stay energized in this business, I will not survive. Pair with a healthy lifestyle, the unique antioxidant compound in Super Beets is clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone, which I try to live, but may not always live up to. Heart health is important to me because, I just hit almost 60. Don't tell anybody. I'm getting that age right now. I've got some, I got some problems with my knees. I got a bad back. So I have to add those things into my lifestyle to help me be more healthy. And I have found, honest to God, that Super Beet Heart Chews actually do help me. I get more energy. I don't get a crash afterwards. It's very health energy. It's all natural. It's plant-based chew. There's no stimulants and there's no artificial sweeteners, but it tastes great anyway. So I do use Super Beets Heart Chews every single day. And they really help me out a lot. Now, here's the good news for you. You can get them too. You can double your potential with Super Beets Heart Chews. Now, get a free 30-day supply of Super Beets Heart Chews on all bundles And you get 15% off your first order by going to getsuperbeats.com and using code FRED. Yep, my name. Super easy. That place for that is, again, getsuperbeats, BETS.com, code FRED. Getsuperbeats.com today. They're great. I use them. They help me with my energy and keep me going so I can be here for you every week and keep telling the story of our democracy. And we're back. So, you guys that you mentioned earlier, you've had a 75% win rate, right? And nearly every elected you've worked with has outrun the top of the ticket, whether it was Biden or their gubernatorial. What's been your secret to your success, if you will? You said a little bit before the break. We tell them to run as who they are. A lot of times, it's just running, right? It's having the backing, having support to run. Is that the secret to your success, you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, the part of the problem is, and in rural organizing, one of the things that people thought it was controversial about Outrun is that when we talk about diversity and issues of diversity in rural communities, we said no, this isn't just a problem with the Republican Party. It's as long as Democrats in these communities, mostly older white Democratic elected officials, are saying you have to be like Joe Manchin to run for local office in these towns. Right. We're not going to recruit people to run for local office, and this work is more than ever necessary right now because, you could be a young person, you could be 22 years old, you could be working loading dock at Home Depot or something. You could kind of be scared of the things that are happening, but you're not being given the proper resources to run for local office. What Outrun does is we say, hey, if you want to run for office, here's the way to do it. This is what a win number is, and it's, for your listeners, crucial. If anybody ever tells you that you don't have the experience to run for office, ask them what a win number is, and if that person can't define what that is, they don't know shit, right? And a win number is the number of votes you need to win your local election, right, divided by the last two elections, what have you, right? And we take that information and then we expose folks who have never run for office to folks who look like them being elected in similar communities, right? So, one of the things we usually hear is well, Paolo, this is a 99% white county. How could they elect a person of color? My friend Giancarlo Ivarius, the first Latino, the first Peruvian American county legislator in Dutchess County since 1821, right? 98% white county, that district that he represents, right? Folks like Marilyn Lands in central Alabama and northern Alabama who were told, well, this district is a Trump district. You can't run as a pro-choice woman in Alabama. Outran Joe Biden by 19 points in a district that Trump won and won an election to the state house. So we build that momentum to encourage candidates to be themselves. And then, 85% of the other stuff is when you get people to be themselves, they can talk about their communities like the person that they are, right? Because no consultant like me and you are not going to tell you how to talk about Kirkwood, right? And you're not going to tell me how to talk about Elmira, right? But what I can tell you is that if we can build the confidence in candidates to win elections, then they can actually tell the stories of their communities and what they think needs to change, right? And that is a message that crosses partisan lines. And the other thing is if you got a 22-year-old kid or a young person running for local office or something, odds are they have relatives and people in the community. And these elections are small enough to have 500 electorate folks. And like Tim Walz said, right, 20 out of the 24 people that graduated, 12 of his were cousins. Your Trump-supporting grandfather might not vote for Joe Biden, but they'll vote for you. And in voting for you, you can stop a book ban. And I'm not saying that that's the start of the solution to everything, but it's the start of the conversation to returning the notion of what the Democratic Party used to be in these communities back to them, reminding them that the local Democratic Party has their back. And it's not just some foreign social club entity that's going to talk about this stuff. Sorry if I'm talking too much. I apologize.
No, I'm letting you roll for a reason. That's great. I think you nailed it right there. Look, I always say that today's school board members, tomorrow's state legislators, the next day's congressmen. And the way we take this country back, and people ask me constantly, Paolo, they constantly ask me, how do we stop the MAGA movement? Is it defeating Trump? No, it's just step one. The movement's gone well beyond that. Like we said, I live in Missouri. There's a lot of little Trumpies all over the place. We just had the most horrible human being, Valentina Gomez, try to run for Secretary of State. You all saw her, right? You saw her. We saw the terrible videos of her cursing, her homophobia. She took, I think, 7th in the primary. That's hope right there. So we know it starts here. It starts with that race, and it starts with saying, hey, look, we're just you. We're not We're not monsters.
Yeah.
We're not trying to kill, and we're not eating eating babies. We're not. Now, you guys have joined the Rural Americans for Harris Coalition as well. Just recently, I see a lot of my personal friends. You mentioned my friend Jess Piper. Tell us about that effort. Why it's so important to the campaign. I mean, it's really encouraging to see the Harris campaign do that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a grassroots effort. It's volunteer led. It's not directly tied to the campaign, but it's the first time that I've seen like momentum of like, I guess I could tell you the story if that's okay, if I have a quick second. But
yeah,
in the middle of August, I was like, hey, like, why isn't it, all these calls for Harris were happening, and they had I just thought it was interesting that the White Guys for Harris call had a rural organizer on their call that was a white guy. No shade to them. They're great. I love them. I love what's his name? Ross Morales Roquetto and all those folks. But then I realized that's cool. They have a rural organizer. Why don't we do a rural themed call? And why don't we do a rural themed call that actually talks about rural America and talks to the local elected officials that we've worked with that are more than willing to talk about their communities in their own way as they are, than like having to fight MAGA on a social media war kind of like landscape, right?
Yeah.
So I talked to Jane Klebb, Jess Piper, Chris Jones, a bunch of other folks, and we decided, why don't we start a Rural Americans for Harris call? And we just started collecting folks' emails and inviting folks. Ended up with like Jennifer Gardner being a part of our call and Bobby Burke from Queer Eye. And then, the beautiful thing that Outrun did is we were able to help provide around 13 local Democratic elected officials, all of whom, like you said, had Outrun the top of the ticket, one in rural parts of their swing states and stuff. And those folks talked about like why they're so excited for Biden Harris and stuff, or Harris-Walz, sorry. And that momentum kind of carried into us having recruited over 6,000 volunteers from 48 states, raising $22,000 in an hour and a half. And now we're working on making sure that rural communities in swing states across the country and just rural America overall, that visibility is represented in the campaign and in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And that's how we started Rural for Harris, and very happy to have done that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And circling back to something you said earlier too is you said that you guys you have or actually I was looking at my notes. You guys now have the largest network of Democratic elected officials, but it's the largest Democratic officials under the age of 40. I spoke to John Della Volpe just 2 weeks ago here on the show. He's an expert in the millennials and Gen Zs, right? It might be surprising that so many young rural Americans are getting involved in Democratic politics to a lot of folks. I mean, you guys are a youth movement in a lot of ways too, aren't you?
Yeah, look, literally every single elected official that we've worked with, and there's over 500 of them. And this isn't like a complicated, like, how do you do this kind of question? It's just like, we go into rural county Democratic parties and we're just like, look, if you've never seen yourself in a local office, here's 5 Democratic elected officials that look like you.
Yeah.
Your town is as red as this town. The partisanship, all that stuff is there. This is what a win number is. Here's a template to win local office. And now, older county Democratic Party leadership, think of the kids in your life that you could possibly want to step up to run for local office.
Yeah.
And we just give these county parties this information and we build these templates for them. And all of a sudden, like 3 weeks later, it'll be like, hey, or like maybe 2 months later, people will be like, hey, Paolo, I'll just get like these random emails like, here's 15 people that got elected to town council in this part of Central Tennessee or Eastern North Carolina or Southwestern Virginia or something. And all of them like were inspired by some of the work you do. Somehow they're tangentially tied to what you're doing with Outrun, right? They won. Now teach them tax policy and stuff.
Right. How to do a city budget? Like how to? I mean, that's what city councils do. They do the budget for the city. And then some of them have never done that, right?
Yeah, and that momentum sometimes. We'll do a training with like a group of like rural county Democratic parties via Zoom. First, they have to agree to it and all that stuff. And afterwards, there'll be like people who were like, I never thought about running for office until I saw folks like Miles Bannon, the mayor, the vice mayor of Shadron, where Walz went to high school, who's like a Native American deputy mayor who, won in the reddest electoral vote seat district in the country, right, in Nebraska. Folks like Jade Harris, who outperformed Joe Biden, and I think the first time a woman of color did that in the South, in a local elections, deputy mayor Glasgow, Virginia, right? Folks like Yilang Xiong, right, who's a a sitting county supervisor in Marathon County, Wisconsin, who is like the Hmong community, has entrusted them and him to like run for state assembly. Like, these are the voices that are going to be changing the future of rural organizing. And not to humble brag or something, but I feel like it's kind of tiring to be like the only person who's like a person of color in a place where 25% of people are people of color that does this kind of work. So, we work with folks like Data Barnes in Alabama, Chris Jones in Arkansas.
Good friend.
This isn't just about like getting people elected to office and stuff and flipping seats. It's also changing the face of what a rural consultant looks like, and building allyship with folks like you, Fred, and Just Piper and stuff, who, push our momentum to go forward, because people don't end up some people don't end up believing in what we do because they don't think that, like, well, what can you do? This is such a Republican area. But when you believe in the idea that there is a future and a promise for your community, there's a candidate there that you can get elected with that idea. And that really is the kind of, like, more than just like youth is like a number or age or something. That's the youth momentum that I think is like the real encouraging thing about Outrun and stuff.
Yeah.
So, cool.
It's funny, as you're speaking, I'm reminded of my old days in the military. So I served in Iraq, as you may have, a 3 times. And there's a theory of counterinsurgency called Inkpot strategy. And the idea is, it's technically what we followed in Iraq, which was the idea that we could secure a town, put in good governance, put in security forces, put in elected officials that are proper. And when we secure that town, then we secure the one next to it. And we secure that town, put in good security, make people feel safe, get the businesses running. And then we connect the 2, and then we connect 3, and then we connect 4. And like you said, you're looking at ink spots in Tennessee, rural Tennessee. You're looking at ink spots in rural Alabama, in northern Florida, in outstate Missouri, upstate New York. Those little ink spots will grow to be larger ink spots. And then it's just a matter of time. And people say, it's funny you mentioned Chris Jones. He's become honestly a very dear friend. I just love him to death.
I love him. I love him. I think he's like one of the most charming people I've ever met.
He's wonderful. And so, but I was talking to Chris about this, and Chris puts it so well. He goes, everybody always says it's going to be a 10-year project to turn these states around. He goes, and they say, so we can't get started. He goes, well, if it's going to take 10 years, we got to start now. Otherwise, it's always going to be, And so what you're doing, what you're describing by taking the risk to go into these and spending the money and the time to go into these small rural communities, that's how we take it back. I mean, that's how in the end, circling back to what I said earlier, if you really want to move the MAGA movement back into where it belongs, move America back to a place where we can talk to each other at baseball games again, it does start in the places where you guys are putting candidates, and does start in places that look like you. I think is that accurate? It's funny. One of the things we're facing here in Missouri, of course, it's very difficult to break these Republican supermajority states. I know you've talked about that quite a bit. I'm seeing momentum down ballot for Democrats. There's a lot of momentum to break these majorities and force Republicans to finally think about their progressive constitution. That's a big part of your mission, right? It's kind of break supermajorities in key states. Where are you fighting that battle right now?
So Tennessee, Arkansas, we're doing a little bit in North Carolina, Florida too as well, working with Hale Morissette and a couple of other candidates that are running for state house seats. One group that has been really helpful to this sort of thing is the State House Projects with David Pepper, who has worked with us. And one thing that's been really refreshing is sometimes we go into rural county Democratic parties and people are like, oh, we don't need your help, right? Like we're going to go talk to everybody and talk to everyone. And, I'm going to be a quote unquote moderate Democrat, and then you ask them what a win number is and they don't know. Yeah. And they freak, sometimes some of these folks have a meltdown over that. But it's really great to see folks like Just Piper and David Pepper and stuff kind of like encourage us and work with us and mobilize our momentum to the point where it's like, my friend Anderson Clayton, who is now the chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party.
I interviewed her 2 months ago.
She ran against somebody that she ran against a candidate that had been endorsed by the whole executive board of the state party, and she won, right? So the conversation around breaking supermajorities is it's 60% electoral, 40% heart. 40% of the effort is not just having the candidates there. It's having candidates there that are not going to freak out and stand up for good values, right? The other part of Outrun that a lot of people, we don't really talk about it. Say, sure, we work with all sorts of candidates. We don't work with pro-life candidates. We don't work with people who hate on our LGBTQ plus communities.
Yep.
And like, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of weird when people talk about immigration like it's an ideological choice. And you know, as an immigrant speaking, and we think that breaking supermajorities in places like Tennessee and Arkansas and Florida and Missouri it's a project that's, sure, like Chris Jones said, 10 years, but it's much better when you have someone that's not seen as a sacrificial lamb. When somebody that's like willing to say, hey, I'm willing to go out there and it might seem impossible, but I'm going to do the impossible, right? And get people to run for office. That is so much more powerful. And obviously the Republicans spend money against us and all that stuff, but you know, it shows that there is more than just momentum, that there's a movement being built out there within the Democratic Party and against, and, you know, to not be forgotten. And also like to make sure that the Republican Party here realizes that, hey, like, you know, this town, I might get 42% of the vote here, but 8% of voters are people I worked with at a local loading dock, and they know me very well. And the incel dude that you're bringing in from Staten Island to run for local office is going to call me ugly, but can't talk to people about their property taxes and stuff. And so that, look, if there's a story and like a way that I want to look at the momentum of what we're talking about, it's look at upstate New York, right? Upstate New York has multiple state senators of color that represent rural areas, multiple women. We are about to achieve parity with how many Republicans versus Democrats represent rural upstate New York, right? Wow. We have supermajorities in the Cayuga County Legislature. We flipped 3 city councils, right, in 2023. And this wasn't done on the notion of like, you know, if we freak out and just run as moderates, then that's going to move people. It was done on the notion of like, you know, it's a 10-year project. It's going to be something that moves forward. But I bet you people will want to vote for someone because they're for something and not against something. And when we're for standing up for people's rights, when we're for saying like, hey, it's kind of weird that you're like, you know, tying the price of milk to like whether or not women can have like birth control, right? That's the political calculation that the Republican Party is making. It changes the dynamic. And look, my personal experience in New York State, it's a conversation around that, but it's also like, you know, dealing with the young Republicans, like they're nasty. Nobody wants to deal with them, and they also don't care about our communities. Like you could tell them, you know, they're going to talk about the way that they're mobilizing people through MAGA and stuff. You know, we flipped 3 county legislatures. The reddest county in New York State in 2023 elected 9 out of 12 Democratic town supervisors in Allegheny County, and these guys don't even know that, and they don't care, right? And the most important thing is MAGA is, for the most strongest proponents of MAGA, right? I'm not talking about Trump voters, MAGA people. This argument is an internal self-assurement that they are morally and they are morally and just like better, a superior person than we are. Right. And if that's the argument that MAGA and the Republicans are going to tell everyone, then I'm just going to go down the street and tell people who are Republicans that don't really care about Donald Trump because they work 9-to-5 jobs. That's what they're saying about you. Right. And when you tell them that, you know, like I kind of.
No, you're good. No, I think you're right. I mean, it goes to the disconnect. What you're getting to is the disconnect between the reality of people's lives and the message they're being given by your opponents, right? And if we and I tell my opponents, I always tell every candidate I work with at every level, like just remember every race is local, even if you're running for Congress. Yeah. And it matters the people. What are you doing for their lives? And we've been hurt too long, especially the last 9 years, with people whose only interest in being elected was to be on TV or cultural war issues, right? I mean, I was joking. I'm joking on Twitter before you and I came in the studio. This is Wednesday. I came in because they had a press conference before the CR vote today, and they said the Republican House priority for the next week or two is fighting wokeness more. It's like, the F are you talking about? What fucking plan are you on? I mean, people are worried about other things than wokeness. Okay, you know, they're worried, like you said, property taxes. They're worried about lack of jobs. They're worried about the fentanyl crisis in their small towns. They're worried about the fact they see their towns dying because new people aren't coming. And when you see a town like they picked Springfield, Ohio, to target. It's been revitalized by these new legal immigrants. These migrants, they're not migrants; they're legal immigrants, right? And they're here to do good things. And I think you're right. I think if you show people that the immigrants that are coming are good people, and the diversity is not what they represent. So I think so. The last question I'll let you, and that's what I love about Tim Walz. Circling back to what I said about Tim Walz at the very beginning of this, he's from that world. He speaks the language. I think we had John Del Volpe on here 2 weeks ago, and John happened to be in Minneapolis the day that Tim Walz got the pick. The nomination pick for vice president, and he was in the middle of a focus group, a separate focus group. And he said at the end, he asked this focus group of Minneapolis residents and residents of Minnesota about Tim Walz, and the overwhelming comment was, he's just a guy. Like he's a guy from small town America. He's a guy that doesn't have a stock portfolio. He's not a guy who's a CEO. He's just a guy like you and me. And there's so much relation to that. And I think that's was the power that Tim Walz has brought to the ticket, especially for what you're doing, the rural vote and the rural. He speaks our language, and that the language is what you said earlier too. Is they're just weird. It's weird to talk about. It's weird that the only thing they're worried about in Springfield, Ohio, is this supposed kidnapping of cats. You know what I mean? So that's the power of that conversation, isn't it? We do have a top of a ticket that gets it, don't we?
Yeah, I do. I think so. I think that, like, specifically, and not just like Walz, but like specifically Vice President Harris, right? Like I met Vice President Harris in 2020. I never felt when I met her and I talked to her about like the work that I was doing, rural caucus organizing for the state party here in New York at the time. Yeah. And she was like, well, how are things in your town? How are things happening in your town? What's going on that we can change? And this was in New York City, right? One thing that I find really great is like, look, I deal with a lot of politicians in New York City. I deal with all the fundraisers and stuff like that. I've never had somebody come up to me and be like, so what's going on where you're from that like is making it not vote the way that it used to? Wow. The other part of the argument that a lot of people don't talk about is a lot of the places that didn't vote Democratic that are voting Democratic now. I mean, and there's in Missouri and stuff like that, used to be very strong Democratic strongholds. Yeah. And we have to give people hope, and we have to give them a hope that has a promise to it. And that promise is not like, we're going to make sure that that Lego makes only white mini figurines or something like that, or that 7-Eleven clerks are all white or something like that. Yeah. We're just going to make sure that your grandkid, that there's an opportunity where if your grandkid doesn't want to have to leave to Chicago or New York City or Los Angeles or something because there's no jobs where you're from, that there's a chance that they can stay, right? Like one of the most emotional things that we talk about in rural organizing is, people talk about families being broken up and, all this stuff at the border. Donald Trump's been breaking up, and the Republican Party has been breaking up families for quite a few decades now because of like really bad economic policy that has separated young people from the rural communities. And honestly, like this is a really good way to kind of say we're winning back our future. There's a place for you in your hometown, and nobody can tell you that you can't be from there or wherever because you're an immigrant or you're gay or what have you. And if you want to run for office, Outrun and every other organization that we work with is here to help you.
I love that.
That I think is the message. Yeah,
it's a great message. It's a great place to wrap our time. Yeah. Here's the most important thing I wanted to ask you, and this is the most important thing for our audience, and I'm urging my audience to listen carefully and take notes. Let's shoot it straight. How can people find more information about Outrun, find more information about your rural coalition building? How can they maybe throw some money your way to help this important mission? Tell us where to find you, brother. Okay, so you can find us on Twitter at the Outrun Co. And we have an email called the Outrun Coalition at gmail.com. It's a grassroots group, so you'll be surprised, we don't take any money. This is a volunteer-led effort. We all have day jobs. All elected officials that work with Outrun, it's all a volunteer network. And I think that's what built our power, because it shouldn't take $8 million to run for school board in central Missouri, right? Right. And, with the Rural Americans for Harris, we actually have an upcoming day of action for folks in Pennsylvania who can make it to Mansfield on the 21st of September. We're going to be in Mansfield. You can Google this online through Mobilize. If you look up the Outrun Coalition, we'll also post it on our page. We're going to be hosting a rural to rural canvas where we're going to be sending folks from New York and rural PA and first-time volunteers to go knock on doors. And then the goal of this is I call it the Border County Fund, is not just get folks to knock on doors, but identify first-time candidates to run next year in the local elections. And so that when, we can build a bench and honestly stab, God, I hate to say it so violently, but like it would really, really be painful for the incel Republican
to know that a drag queen got elected to school board in a place that they think is like purely white, and that happened with Anita Buffum in Casanova. But look, that's the argument. And also, if you want to join our mailing, it's rural the number 4 harris.org /RSVP.
Okay.
And stay tuned. We have a lot of things happening. We're also trying to build up a lot of watch parties for the October 1st vice presidential debate, vice president with Governor Tim Walz, hopefully Vice President Tim Walz in the future. Yeah. And then the last thing that we're doing is, I don't know, and just as something I'm working with with Jess and a group of teachers, is we are hosting a Teachers for Harris call at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on October 7th. Right. Our keynote speaker will be Randy Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers.
Wow.
And finally, the last message I just want to say is, like, if you ever felt like you can't run for office because people tell you can't, that's a load of bullshit. Like, take it from me and take it from anyone. Take it from a guy named Paolo that grew up in a small town where people couldn't pronounce his name. Right? Our organization went from 5 elected officials to 523 in 4 years. Why? Because we stopped taking people's bullshit and just ran for office. This is not, the structural problems that exist in America are artificial. These are things that we can overcome, and I think we can rebuild across rural America. And thank you.
I love it. Well, Paolo Cremidis, thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck to you. Keep up the fight. We appreciate you, brother. Woo! Great talk. Great conversation. You can see the energy and the motivation. Paolo's great leadership. I'm passionate about these issues. I'm going to say one last thing before we go. It's funny, he was talking about how rural Americans, rural kids are looking for jobs. They want to stay in their home. And all I can think of is how connected we are globally to the stories I've heard when I was stationed in Iraq. I hate going back to that, but it's a funny story. When I started helping villages in Iraq in 2003, the first request at every village I visited in rural Iraq surrounding the Key West Air Base in Nineveh province, every mayor asked for a school. Every sheikh wanted a school. And when I asked them why they wanted a little 6-room schoolhouse in their village, they always said the same thing. It's like, because we live so far out in the country, we want to keep our kids here. So the world is connected. The issues we face here in America, even in rural America, the same issues people face around the world. We are connected. And which also brings us to the power of our immigrants, the power of legal immigration, bringing us new blood who has experience. A rural kid from, believe it or not, a rural kid from northern Iraq who lives in the middle of a bunch of wheat fields isn't that much different than a rural kid growing up in America in the middle of Kansas in the middle of a wheat field. So, interesting conversation, fascinating work. Check out Outrun. Check out the Rural Coalition. I won't keep you much longer. We had a great conversation today. In the meantime, look, folks, we're less than 6 weeks out. This is your chance to get involved. I tell you every week, volunteer, wave signs aside. I'm also telling you now, put your signs out. Get the signs. If you have to buy them off of Amazon, fine. If you can't get them from the campaign. Donate if you can. Get your T-shirts. Put them on. Get your mugs from the Vote Vets. Whatever you can do, get in the fight. Show your colors. I wore my Veterans for Kamala shirt to our Kirkwood, Missouri Green Tree Festival last weekend. I got more compliments. I had more people stop me to talk about it. I had an older gentleman who was running a booth there pull me into his booth to talk about that fact that he had voted for Trump in 2016 and then saw him go crazy in office, and then there was January 6th. And he was gratified to see veterans having common sense and supporting Kamala Harris. Those are the conversations you have. Wear your colors. Get out there. Show them you exist. Let's not hide. We are on the winning side. We've got momentum. Let's keep pushing until the end. With that, I'm not going to keep you longer. Thanks for everything thanks for being part of this. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you like. Leave a comment. I love hearing from you. I am Fred Wellman, every week right here in the Midas Touch Network. We'll see you next week.